Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be talking all about my most anticipated romances of 2022 and how those romances ended up working out. You might have seen in my last video, I talked about my 5-star predictions / most anticipated romances for the coming year for 2023, and I wanted to do a follow-up to, I guess, 2021 / 2022's version of that by letting you know how my most anticipated romances of 2022 went. I made a video about the 17 romances I was really excited to read this year, and I had mixed results with some of those, but I'm excited to share my thoughts and feelings on those books, let you know which ones were worth your time and were worth my time, I suppose. But before I get into that, I wanted to tell you a little bit about the sponsor of today's video, Ritual. I'm super excited to be working with Ritual because I've been on the hunt for a really good prenatal vitamin for a little while here, and I feel like I found one that I actually enjoy. I want to say upfront that I am not currently pregnant. I know a lot of y'all are going to ask in the comments down below, but the ideal time to start taking a prenatal vitamin is earlier than you think, actually. It's like 3 months before you hope to become pregnant. And when you're expecting a baby, getting the right nutrients and enough of them becomes really important. Ritual Essential Prenatal is 2 easy-to-take capsules that provide you and your baby with 12 essential nutrients before and during pregnancy. I really trust Ritual because they're really transparent about their ingredients and why they use them. On their website, you can actually scroll through their ingredient list and learn more about why they're in the vitamin and also where they come from, which is something that I personally really love. And I also think it's really cool that they're able to pack so much into just 2 capsules. Before I started taking this prenatal, I was taking a different one, and that one had like an additional choline supplement, which was just a pain to have to remember to take in addition to a prenatal vitamin, but Ritual is able to put that in the 2 capsules, which I really appreciate. I'm also kind of a nerd about the ingredients in vitamins, and I really like that in addition to having that choline in the 2 capsules, there's also methylated folate and B12, which is really cool because about 40% of women have a genetic variant that makes it more difficult for their body to utilize folic acid. It's another one of those things that I was looking for when I was picking out a prenatal, and it was really challenging to find a vitamin on the market that actually had methylated folate as opposed to folic acid, so I really like that it's included in this vitamin. And the delayed release capsule is really gentle on an empty stomach, and there's a citrus tab in every bottle to keep everything fresh. Also, if you're not pregnant or looking to become pregnant, Ritual offers a multivitamin for women and men, a teen vitamin, a 50+ vitamin, and a postnatal vitamin, all of which can be delivered to your door via subscription. Another thing that I totally love, I am notoriously bad about running out of vitamins, prenatal or otherwise, and then kind of forgetting to pick them up at the grocery store. With Ritual, I don't have to think about it. I'm getting them delivered straight to my door in mailers that are made of recycled newspaper and plant fibers. And they don't just offer vitamins either. They have an essential protein range, and they just launched a symbiotic range. If you're thinking, trying, or already pregnant, or you just want to check out Ritual in general, right now Ritual are offering 20% off your first month by going to ritual.com/chandler820 and using code chandler820 at checkout. Thanks again to Ritual for sponsoring this portion of today's video. Okay, so we're starting off with the book that I read most recently, and yet somehow probably have the least to say about. How to Be a Wallflower by Eloisa James. This book was bland, which honestly I think sometimes is worse than being bad. At least with a bad book, I can crack a bad joke or wax poetic about its failings, but bland? There's not much to say. The premise of this one was interesting enough. You have this unconventional British heiress who is trying to debut into society to please her, I wouldn't say estranged grandfather, but this grandfather that she didn't really grow up around. Her mother was a very interesting woman. I think she was supposed to be this like society lady, but decided that she wanted to kind of run away and be a part of a theater troupe instead. And so again, our heroine was raised in a very unconventional sense, but she wants to get close with her grandfather, and the way to do this obviously is to debut into society and be the proper lady that everyone, assumes that she should be. But she doesn't really want to marry. It's never really been her intention. She definitely has that same like free-spiritedness as her mother. But I think Cleo also acknowledges the fact that she is a very conventionally attractive woman and that people are going to be kind of hunting down her fortune in a sense. So she decides to enlist the help of a costume shop to make her a lot of dresses for her debut. She's hoping that in dressing up in a very unconventional way that people won't really want to have anything to do with her, or that she'll somehow become an unmarriageable prospect. So she goes to this costume shop and ends up getting into a conversation with an American man who is trying to buy the costume shop out from under the female owner, and our heroine's like upset about this. She doesn't think that this woman is getting a fair shake. She's not getting a fair cut of the money, the woman that owns this shop, and so she steps in and offers to buy the place instead of this American man. They sort of butt heads, and obviously the romance is between her and the guy named Jacob, and they kind of become friends over the course of the story, and they also kind of do sort of like a rivals to lovers situation where he is going to make the costumes or get the costumes made for her debut, and she is going to get costumes made for him to make him look unmarriageable as well, or something like that. I don't really know why she is helping him out or why she is making costumes for him, but whoever I guess wins this competition will end up winning the costume emporium. It's all kind of convoluted and sadly very uninteresting. I think the biggest failing of the story was the fact that this was promised to be a friends to lovers story. I feel like the plot line was interesting enough and I wanted to see them kind of become friends over time, but it was more so we are kind of acquaintances at this point, let's go make out in the corner. Okay, I've made costumes for you and you're at your debut talking to other men. Okay, let me fill you up. I just wasn't entirely convinced at the chemistry between these two. I didn't feel like the dialogue was particularly witty or interesting, which was really disappointing because I feel like that's what I go to Eloisa James for. Her writing typically feels a little bit more sophisticated, shall we say, than other historical romance authors, but the past couple of books that I've read by her I have not been particularly impressed by, so I feel like maybe I need to be a little bit more discerning with the books I pick up by her, maybe vet them and look at the Goodreads reviews before picking her books up. This one was just kind of whatever for me. I ended up giving it 2 stars, and I think in general I'm probably just going to take a short-term break from her stuff. Next up, we have a book that I actually was impressed by, The Bodyguard by Catherine Center. Obviously, I put this book on this list because I wanted to like it, but I feel like I went into the book with a fair amount of caution. I have had really good luck with Catherine Center's books in the past, but she does write women's fiction, and it seemed like this one was going to veer more into romance territory. Like, I didn't want to get too excited that this one would be a perfect read for me, but it ended up being a total success. This one is about Hannah, who is a bodyguard working for an executive protection agency with a bunch of other bodyguards. And it's really fun because the side characters in this book, I think, have a lot of personality and definitely add a little bit to the story. And Hannah's going through a bit of a breakup as well at the beginning. She has definitely been through kind of a hard time. I think her mom dies and then she gets dumped by her boyfriend who was like cheating on her this entire time. Absolutely horrible stuff. And she has to work with that guy and the girl that he was cheating on her with. So she's just going through it. Overall a bad time. But to get this dream job that she really wants to kind of take her mind off of all the things that have been happening, she has to prove to her boss that she can handle it. She has assigned a guy, a celebrity, shall we say, named Jack Stapleton, and if she is able to protect him successfully, she will get that big job that she really desires. And I found it to be a very fun romance, despite the celebrity aspect to it. I actually just finished Funny You Should Ask, which I think is a story that a lot of people really enjoyed this year. I personally did not, because I'm finding that I don't love celebrity romances, and I feel like typically the reason for that is that the heroines tend to be a little pathetic, shall we say. I just don't really find a wish fulfillment aspect to a story where the woman kind of falls first. The woman is the one that's obsessed with the man before he even knows she exists. It doesn't really work well for me. I kind of want it to be the other way around. And in this story, it kind of is the other way around. Jack definitely instantly takes to Hannah. He is instantly attracted to her. He definitely has a thing for her, and he flirts with her, I would say, pretty relentlessly. But again, since Hannah is kind of dealing with her own stuff, she's not like easily charmed by this guy. I mean, obviously she thinks he's like super hot and wants to help him out, but she's not really excited about the prospect of being his fake girlfriend to be around his sick mother, who he is in Houston to take care of. And the reason she is his bodyguard in the first place, by the way, is because he's being stalked by a pretty harmless woman who's like really into corgis or something like that, which I feel like leads me well into the reason that I liked this book. I liked it because it didn't take itself too seriously. I feel like a book like this can easily feel really corny and cheesy if it takes itself too seriously, but this one was just a lot of lighthearted fun. The author's note said that Catherine Center was writing this book during the pandemic. She wanted something fun and lighthearted, and it definitely comes off that way in this book. But there were definitely swoony moments as well. I really did like Jack, and I liked that since our author typically writes women's fiction, there was an emotional thread in the story that I think made it feel grounded enough in reality for me to actually root for these characters. I really enjoyed the story. I didn't think too hard about it, and I ended up giving it 5 stars. I feel like if I were being really objective, I could maybe bump that down a little bit, but it's very rare, I would say, that I get a lot of joy out of novels these days. Not that I don't love reading, but you know, I read so much that the likelihood I'm gonna have a ton of 5 stars is pretty low, and you know what? If I was being overly generous, I'm fine with that. Next up, I actually have 2 books on this list that I wasn't able to read because they weren't published this year. Motel by Penelope Douglas and Caution to the Wind by Gianna Darling. Obviously, I don't have a lot to say about these books. Motel didn't get published because I think Penelope was too busy focusing on other books. They ended up publishing Falls Boys this year, which I really liked and we'll be talking about later on in the video. Caution to the Wind, though, is one that's a little strange for me because it did have a release date, had a cover, had a blurb, and it seemed like Gianna Darling was already finished writing this book. So kind of whatever the case may be, I hope that Gianna is in a good place. I hope she's doing well, and I hope, fingers crossed, that this book sees the light of day soon. Now, in case you needed a reminder that I am in fact stupid, I added a Colleen Hoover book to this list last year. This book is about Kenna, who goes to prison for reasons that I'm not quite sure are not spoilers, so I'll just say she did some not very good things, and when she gets out, she is really desperate to reconnect with the daughter that she was forced to give up while in prison. She ends up going to prison pregnant, having the baby, and then the baby goes to the paternal grandparents, and they want Kenna to have nothing to do with her daughter, but obviously when she's released from prison 4 years later, she is desperate to connect with her daughter, and she does that, or at least attempts to do that. Now, my reasons for adding this book to this list were pretty weak, I will say, but I also like to think that I added this book to this list because I really enjoyed Regretting You last year. It was one of my favorite books because it had a delightful mutual pining element, and I feel like the emotional thread in that story made a lot of sense and was well executed. But I think that Colleen Hoover personally lives to disappoint me. That's certainly an exaggeration, but I do think that my main feeling here was disappointment. I feel like there was a lot of missed potential and squandered opportunity. Having a female main character leave prison to reunite with her daughter, get a job, readjust to normal life is in and of itself compelling. I wanted it to go further in that direction. The focus on the insta-love relationship and constantly being kind of pathetic in her attempts to like sneak around to try to get in contact with her daughter. It just didn't work for me personally. I guess in some ways I can appreciate Kenna's remorse, but I think I personally wanted someone a little bit more resilient and a little bit more motivated in her actions. Life has definitely been unkind to her, and I just feel like I wanted to see her determined in a way to help her daughter that wasn't just like crying and sneaking around. Something that was, let me sit down and put a plan in place to maybe, I don't know, talk to the grandparents of my child to get them to understand logically why it makes sense for us to talk, rather than like skulking around a neighborhood. Come on, girl. Get it together. I think it was supposed to pull on our heartstrings, but honestly, I was just kind of shaking my head the entire time. Again, didn't care about the love interest. I felt like Kenna was kind of stupid. Anyway, I'm gonna stop there because I have to talk about this book 2 other times before the year is over, which is already too many times for me. I'm already sick of talking about it. 2 stars, moving on. Next up, we have Praise by Sarah Kate. Initially, this was a bit of a wild card pick for me because when I put it on the list, the synopsis of the book really only said that this was going to be an ex-boyfriend's dad romance. There was no cover, and I'd never read anything by this author before. And while this book wasn't my absolute favorite, it did introduce me to a series that I ended up really enjoying this year. The second and third book in this Salacious Players Club series are actually some of my favorite like smuttier romances of the year. This book is about Emerson and Charlie and their kinky relationship. As I stated, this is an ex-boyfriend's dad romance. Charlie has an interesting, I guess you could say, meet cute with Emerson. She is going to pick up the security deposit for the apartment she had with her ex-boyfriend, and instead Emerson thinks that this is his kinky new secretary, and so he treats her kind of sexually, not knowing who she is. Obviously, they kind of figure it out as things kind of unfold, but Charlie finds out some stuff about herself that day, and that she might want to actually be employed by Emerson, you know, sexually or otherwise, and it was fine. I gave it 3 stars. I think the thing about the Salacious Players Club series and kink-focused books in general is that if you do not enjoy the kink that you're reading about, it can be kind of hard to totally fall for the romance. I feel like this book was well told enough. I feel like all of the books in the series are well plotted, they're not meandering or anything, and the characters are not like hateable at all, but I will say I found Charlie to be a little bit too pathetic for my taste, and I don't personally have a praise kink. I felt like I wanted Charlie to have a little bit more confidence. I feel like it could have really bolstered the believability of the relationship between Charlie and Emerson, but instead I feel like it just proved the point that she was maybe a little bit too immature to be in this kind of relationship, or be in a relationship with an older man in general. And also Emerson just wasn't personally my favorite kind of hero. He was just a little bit bland and a little bit too, he just wasn't my type. I mean, I'll leave it there. I would recommend, like I said, this series as a whole though. I think read through the synopses of each of the 4 books and decide like which one strikes your fancy and pick it up on a rainy day. I feel like it might do a little something for you if you're into a good smutty romance. I would definitely be interested to pick up more from Sarah Kate in the future. A book from another new to me author that did not go as well, sadly, is Set on You by Amy Leah. I was initially interested in this book because I personally really love lifting, even though it's been a while, and the idea of a romance centered around a woman who lifts weights was compelling enough for me to add this book to my list, kind of sight unseen, kind of not knowing the author. But my excitement quickly fizzled away when I picked up the audio of this book and realized that this book focuses on one of the worst parts about being a gym-going female, and that is men. This book is about our main character, Crystal, who is a curvy fitness influencer, and so she's constantly filming clips of herself at the gym to kind of show her followers what she's up to. And we have a guy named Scott who thinks that he is a really cool guy, who ends up stealing the squat rack that Crystal is using and sort of belittling and teasing her along the way. I think we're supposed to think this is charming and funny, but the gym is already sort of a tense place in general, right? I think a lot of women don't go to the gym because they don't want to deal with being heckled and harassed by men. And so to have that be the meet cute situation in a gym setting romance just felt very off to me, and Scott, I just never really warmed to him as the story continued. The like antagonistic kind of playful relationship happens for about 20% of the book. It's not like one encounter, it happens multiple times. He like steals her phone at one point, which I really did not like or enjoy, and the rest of the story too, it just carried on in a way that I wasn't interested in. I feel like the plot of the story was just kind of bland and forgettable, and with that kind of lackluster, almost irritating opening, I just couldn't give this book anything more than 2 stars, which was kind of a bummer because I was really excited about it. But I've not discounted this author's work altogether. I'm going to read her follow-up novel, which comes out in 2023. It's actually on my most anticipated list for 2023. I'll leave a link in the description if you have not checked out that video. But yeah, sadly, this was just a 2-star read for me. Next up, we have Delilah Green Doesn't Care, which is a book that got a lot of buzz this year and is actually nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award, which I think is pretty cool because this is, I think, the only, sadly, sapphic romance that was nominated for a Choice Award this year. However, this one was just kind of middle of the road for me, and sadly, that comes down to the characterization of our main character, Delilah. So the main premise is that Delilah is coming back to town to photograph her stepsister's wedding kind of last minute, and she has a pretty bad relationship with her stepsister and stepmother, which really dominates the narrative of the story. And I will say at the beginning, I was pretty sympathetic to the plight of Delilah, and I was kind of surprised as well at the tone of this book because it felt different than what I expected going into a sapphic rom-com. But as the story went on, I was definitely more and more aware of the fact that our main character was over 30 years old and acting like this. It just didn't really make sense. It was like, communicate your feelings or keep them to yourself. It didn't really make sense to kind of sabotage her stepsister's wedding, even before she knew that her stepsister's fiance was kind of a shitty person. I just feel like tonally it was a little bit of a weird choice, and I think it kind of comes down to the fact that this author is known for writing kind of harder hitting YA contemporaries, and I just feel like that ended up getting kind of like smushed in here. Like she wasn't entirely sure how to write just a pure rom-com and decided to kind of add in these harder hitting elements. And I'm not saying that you can't include emotional storytelling in a rom-com or in a romance in general. I just feel like this one felt, again, a little bit tonally jarring because there were moments of like rom-com-ness, and I would say the relationship between Delilah and Claire did feel a little bit more rom-com, but it felt like the other like side things felt a little bit too hard-hitting to go with the rest of the book. I don't know, this one just felt okay to me. And the sad thing is too that I wanted to pick up the second book in this series. I think it's about Delilah's stepsister Astrid, but I've been reading pretty negative early reviews of it, which is disappointing because I wanted to read more adult romances from this author. Maybe I'll just wait for one that like really strikes my fancy where the reviews are really good. Ultimately, I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Again, glad that it's nominated for a Goodreads Choice Award, but it just like wasn't my perfect romance. It didn't really make me swoon to the moon. Next up, we have the Steminist Novellas by Ali Hazelwood. I put these 3 on the list because I wasn't aware that Ali Hazelwood was writing a full-length novel, and I was just excited to get more from her. I wasn't convinced I would like the things that she was going to put out, but I did really like The Love Hypothesis, and I was like, hopefully this isn't like a flash in the pan situation. And you know what? It wasn't. I did really enjoy Love on the Brain. The Steminist Novellas, however, were a little bit of a mixed bag for me, so let's quickly run through those. First up, we have Under One Roof, which is about, I want to say like an oil guy or like someone who works at a job that really like is bad for the environment, and then we have the heroine who's an environmentalist. They end up roommates for some reason, sort of an enemies to lovers situation, but frankly, this is one of the most forgettable things I've read all year. I could not tell you what really occurs between the two of them. I'm sure some like bumping and grinding, but it just ultimately like was very, very bland to me. I think I left this unrated on Goodreads because it was that forgettable. I think now that I'm really trying to summon feelings or like thoughts about what this book was about, I'd give it like 3 stars. It was fine. It wasn't anything horrible, which is more than I can say for Stuck With You, which was the worst of the bunch by a mile. I will say I did kind of barely remember this one. This one I think relies too much on the fact that these characters have a built-in history, sort of an enemies to lovers situation going on or a relationship gone wrong. I think these two kind of like date at one point. It goes really poorly when our heroine finds out some information about the hero, and then they end up stuck on an elevator together and have to kind of like work through their differences. I just didn't really like the hero very much. I didn't really like the romantic setup. I just don't feel like this particular story worked well in a novella setting, so 2 stars. A book that I did kind of find sexy, and I don't know if it's because I was like in the process of like laying an egg, shall we say, but this book is about a chick who works at NASA and a guy who also I think works at NASA. She ends up having to work with this guy who I think specifically said that she didn't deserve funding for her project. She's kind of upset about this. She doesn't really like this guy, and she's concerned because she thought initially I think that he liked her or something. I don't know, something of that sort. Now they're having to work together in Antarctica, but oh no, she gets stuck in a snowdrift and needs to be saved by this guy that she doesn't really like or trust. Let me tell you, I liked this one. I think this one employed the whole flashback thing a lot better than the other books in the series to kind of get us to, again, understand why these characters should be together and why I should be invested in them bumping and grinding. And let me tell you, I very much was invested in that. I really liked the hero in the story too. I think he's the standout of the 3 heroes. He is definitely soft. I want to say he might be a virgin, which we like to see. It's rare, I would say, for sure, for male main characters. In general, he was a sweetie, and I just really liked this book. I thought it was very swoon-worthy. Gave it 4 stars. That being said, I don't think any of these measure up even remotely to Love on the Brain or The Love Hypothesis. I'm very excited for the 3rd book Miss Ali Hazelwood is writing, like the 3rd full novel that she's writing. That one, again, is on my 2023 most anticipated list. These were just kind of like middle of the road, but spoiler, like Love on the Brain for me was 5 stars. So we know that she can write, you know, we're happy about it. Do we think that novellas should be just like left in the dust because they're mostly just like republished Raylo shit? Yeah. Another book that I'm going to have to bitch about extensively for the next coming month, so I'm going to keep it brief. Book Lovers. It sucked. I didn't enjoy this book at all, which is such a bummer because obviously I like Emily Henry. Is it obvious? I don't know if it's obvious. I really liked People We Meet on Vacation. It was my favorite book of last year. I did not, however, enjoy Beach Read, and I think Book Lovers is kind of in the same vein. Follows our main character, Nora. I always want to say Naomi. She's a literary agent and supposed to be this sort of like rivals to lovers relationship with this guy named Charlie, who is an editor. It was very much not that. It's Nora basically babying her baby sister, who is very much a full-grown adult with children, and trying to insert herself where she doesn't belong, trying to understand if her sister's getting a divorce or what. Like, shut up. Let your sister like be. If she wants to tell you things, she's gonna tell you things because, again, can I say it? She's an adult person with children. Overall, I didn't find this one very swoon-worthy. I didn't really care for the main characters, either one of them. They weren't very memorable to me, except for Nora, again, being kind of annoying. So, yeah, 2 stars. Very much more in the Beach Read realm than the People We Meet on Vacation realm. Fingers crossed that Happy Place is a win, because I really really need one. Next up we have Hook, Line, and Sinker by Tessa Bailey, which I think sadly suffered from being the follow-up novel to What Happened One Summer. I think everybody, well not everybody, but a lot of people really enjoyed that book, myself included. I just ate it up. It was my favorite. I'm sorry. Brendan, Piper, y'all are it for me. Y'all are like my people. This one is about Piper's sister Hannah, who sadly just is not as fun to me as her sister. She is definitely more relatable, I think, in some ways, because she is like down to earth and she like wants to follow her passions and stuff. I think she wants to be like a director or something like that. And this is her friends to lovers relationship with FAQS. And it wasn't terrible by any means, but it wasn't a trope-tastic masterpiece that I wanted it to be. We were promised a friends to lovers situation, which is definitely what we got here. There was forced proximity in that Hannah ends up staying with FAQS kind of at the middle point of the story, but I wanted more from it. I wanted this to feel a little bit more isolated. I wanted the focus really to be on Hannah and FAQS kind of being forced to share space together and not being able to sleep together for some reason. While I guess in part it kind of was like that, it didn't really feel like the focus was on their romantic relationship as much as I wanted it to be. I think it was more about the separate emotions of the characters. I think Hannah is trying to reconnect with the memory of her father a little bit more. I think that's like sort of her thing in the story. And while that was kind of Piper's thing as well, it felt balanced, right? And I don't feel like it felt as balanced in the story. Then we also have FAQS, who is dealing with his own stuff, primarily this understanding or idea that other people have of him as this like playboy, that he can get any woman he wants, and he feels like he has to live up to that. And while I feel sympathetic towards that in some ways in some stories, I didn't really feel sympathetic to it here. FAQS just, I don't know, I didn't really care. I was like, speak up for yourself. These guys, especially the guys you work with, should know the kind of person you are. Why not say, hey, yeah, I occasionally sleep with people, but that's not my whole personality? I don't know, I feel like that's something that could have been cleared up pretty early on. I understand some of it like stemmed back to childhood trauma, but I don't know, nip it in the bud, man. Nip it in the bud. Again, I didn't hate this book, but it was just a 3-star read for me. Next up, we have the sole DNF on this list, which is a damn shame because it's a Black queer romance that I really desperately wanted to enjoy. I'm So Not Over You. The main issue for me here was similar to the issue that I had with Delilah Green Doesn't Care, in that I didn't like the narrator of the story. So the story is about Kian and Hudson, and we know at the start that they were in a relationship together. Kian's still like really bitter about this. He is our main character. He's our narrator. And whenever Hudson hits him up and is like, hey, I would love it if you could like pretend to be my boyfriend when my parents are in town, Kian's kind of confused, but he decides to take Hudson up on this opportunity because I believe he was dumped by Hudson and maybe isn't sure himself why they broke up. He goes on this lunch date, and then eventually he is pulled into going to a wedding with Hudson like a couple months down the road for his cousin or something like that. And again, my issue here was Kian. He just was not a sympathetic character whatsoever. I think because we didn't know why Hudson and Kian broke up, it was really hard to understand where the bitterness from Kian was coming from. He was constantly bitching about the fact that Hudson came from money, and it wasn't like Hudson, particularly from what I can remember, like flaunted his wealth in any sense. And I understand obviously that class differences make a huge difference when it comes to a romantic relationship. Like, it's a pretty big deal, especially if the person who comes from money isn't like aware of their own privilege. But I didn't really feel that vibe in this book. Kian just seemed to be like really hung up on the wealth thing for reasons that I couldn't personally understand. I just felt like his character was kind of immature, and it wasn't something that I wanted to continue to read about. Again, especially since I didn't understand why they broke up in the first place. It really took away from my enjoyment of the story, so I just had to DNF this book. I didn't want to continue on with it because I knew that it would end up being like a 2-star for me. Next up, we have a book that I finished, but probably should have DNF'd, Circling Back to You by Julie Tu. Now, I was really excited about this one because I read The Donut Trap last year, and that one was such a delight. It was a book that I picked up, I was gonna say on a whim, definitely not on a whim, but it was for a list video. It was not a book that was on my radar previously, but I picked it up and I found a lot to love about it. First of all, the audiobook narration was fabulous. Secondly, I felt like the main character was someone that I could deeply relate to just based on kind of what she was going through. She was helping her parents with social media for their donut shop while trying to kind of figure out what she wanted to do with her life, all while kind of falling into a romantic relationship with a guy that she had kind of had a crush on in college. But this book, unfortunately, really didn't have the same charm as that first book. This one was a workplace romance between our heroine Cadence and our hero Matt. Cadence, I'm not entirely sure like what her role at the company was, but Matt is in charge of like selling real estate or something like that, commercial real estate. He's really good at his job. He is like definitely a career kind of guy, and his goal is to open up a new branch of the company near where his family lives so he can be closer to family. In doing so, or in visiting his family, I'm not entirely sure, he needs a fake date. So he ends up asking Cadence if she will fill that role. And they're already friends at the beginning of the story. She has a crush on him, he has a crush on her. And I think that's where the story kind of fails for me. I'm not saying that you can't have a sort of like baked in relationship going into a story, right? Or that you can't have best friend situation going into a story, but I need to see more evidence of that best friends thing for me to be invested in the romance. And also I need the romance not to happen at like the 10% mark of this book. They end up like making out or hooking up really, really early on. And then the rest of the romance is just them trying to like deal with their family drama. drama that isn't very interesting either. Cadence was a heroine that I had a hard time rooting for as well because she wasn't really willing to stick up for herself. I don't know, this one was just very bland for me and was very disappointing, again, coming from the author of The Donut Trap, which I really feel like had fun, snappy dialogue and chemistry that was really palpable between characters. I didn't really feel that chemistry, sadly, between Cadence and Matt. It was definitely sort of a tell and not show, so this was a 2-star read for me. And it feels kind of twisted to talk back-to-back about books I hated, but sometimes that's the way the cookie crumbles. Okay, of course, that's an exaggeration. I didn't hate these books. Also, it doesn't pain me to talk about them badly because that's just how I am. I like to tell you the honest truth about books, but I obviously was going to take the opportunity for a bad joke. So, Twisted Hate by Anna Huang is a book that I was really excited about. It's the 3rd book in the Twisted series, and it follows Jules and Josh. Josh is a hotshot doctor, and Jules is Josh's sister's best friend, and they've always kind of had this antagonistic relationship. Jules is an attorney with a secret that she is trying to keep hidden, and despite their efforts to stay away from each other because they've always had this sort of antagonistic relationship, Josh and Jules end up giving into this sort of like palpable chemistry that they have and, start bumping and grinding pretty early on, I would say, in the book. And it just wasn't for me, I will say. This is not my kind of enemies to lovers situation. I like something with a little bit more subtlety, and I think that's what I was expecting, given that these characters are professionals. These are not people fresh out of high school, right? Like, Josh is a doctor, which means he's, I would say, probably at least 25, like mid-20s. Same with Jules. And yet the way that they bicker is like children. The dialogue didn't feel snappy and smart. It didn't feel inspired in any way. I was rolling my eyes a lot at like the nicknames and the things that they were calling each other. And then on top of that, I really did not like a particular scene in this book that was focused on the fact that both of these people were lying to each other. Lying in a romance, I think, is already kind of questionable from a relationship perspective. I think lies can be really hard to come back from, also kind of like cheating. The actions that the characters take because of these lies, I feel like were kind of unforgivable. They're definitely not things that I would be okay with in my romantic relationships. That's not like the benchmark, obviously, for whether or not a romance is good, but it was something that personally made me deeply uncomfortable to read. I ended up giving this book 2 stars. That being said, Anna Huang published 2 other novels in 2022, which I enjoyed considerably more than this one. I gave both of those books 4 stars, so I don't think all is lost with this author. I'm very excited for her upcoming book in 2023. This one just like wasn't my perfect book, so that's fine. Moving on. You might remember that I mentioned earlier talking about Falls Boys by Penelope Douglas, and now is the time to do that. This is the first book in a spin-off series that follows the children of the main characters of the Follow-Away series, and it's set in this sort of like slightly seedy small town that I would compare to a Tree Hill, for instance. This one is an opposites attract romance between a good boy and a girl from the wrong side of the tracks. They end up kind of running from the law and engaging in shenanigans, sexual or otherwise, as the story carries on. There's also sort of like a baked-in mystery plot that I think is going to carry on throughout the series, and it was just a lot of fun, I'm not gonna lie. I feel like the last couple of books from Penelope Douglas have not been my favorite. I feel like Pen's last few romances have been feeling a little bit too long and a little bit too convoluted in terms of plot, but this one I feel like felt a little bit more back to what they're good at. It felt reminiscent in some ways of all of the things that they have been writing more recently. It felt similar in some ways to the Crep series, but with the more of the lightheartedness, I would say, of the Fall Away series. It felt a little bit more realistic, shall we say, and I really liked that these 2 characters felt different than some other characters that Pen has written in the past. I feel like they do make an effort to write characters that feel original, and I can really appreciate that. Now, I ended up giving this book 4 stars instead of 5 stars because while it was a really well-rounded romance in that it had so much going on, but was still able to maintain the romantic elements, it wasn't the swooniest romance that I've ever read. This did follow high school characters, which could be part of it, I'm not entirely sure. It wasn't like, again, like the swooniest thing ever, but it was a really fun one, and in general, I think this book is one of the biggest surprises of the year for me. I wasn't really expecting to like fully love a Penelope Douglas book this year, again, because their last couple of releases haven't been my favorite, but yeah, I really enjoyed this one. Why I decided to put Made in Manhattan on this list, I will never know. That's actually not true. I ended up putting it on this list because I got an arc of it, and I was like, okay, I'm kind of interested, let's do it. It was not, in fact, interesting, though. It's supposed to be a gender-swapped My Fair Lady, with a stuck-up chick from New York helping her stand-in grandmother by gussing up her long-lost country bumpkin grandson, who is slated, I guess, to take over the grandma's company. And it was painfully dull. I haven't read much by this author, but she has written one of my favorite friends to lovers romances of all time, so I was surprised that she was able to write a book this boring. The characters had very little in the way of personality. The plot didn't feel original at all, even considering the fact that it was a retelling. I just feel like if you are wanting to be swept off your feet, you'd have better luck slipping on a banana peel in the grocery store than reading this book. 2 stars. And lastly, we have Ruby Fever by Ilona Andrews, one of my most anticipated romances of the year, simply because it is the final book in the Catalina Baylor trilogy, part of the Hidden Legacy series. A book that, again, I just so badly wanted to love because it was the final book, but unfortunately, it just didn't totally work for me. It wasn't bad because I do think that this author author duo is incapable of writing a truly bad book. I just feel like as the wrap up to a series, this one was a little bit disappointing. And I feel like it kind of reflects my overall feeling about the series in general. The Hidden Legacy series doesn't tout itself as this like sweeping romantic saga or anything, but it is an urban fantasy romance, so I expected more from the romance in this particular trilogy. It's something that I found in the original trilogy, but in this one I just felt like the relationship between Catalina and Alessandro felt a little bit too tell and not show for me. We were definitely like told time and again that these two are so well suited for each other, and we're told that the relationship has developed off page, but I wanted to see more of their relationship kind of take place. And then romance aside, if I'm just objectively looking at this as an urban fantasy, it didn't really do a very good job at wrapping up all of the different storylines. It's not that a lot was like left behind, but I feel like if you are really good at writing action scenes, you perhaps should write an action scene that is longer than 3% of a novel. It was just really disappointing. There was all this lead up. We were gonna get this big bad and this big battle, and I guess there was a battle, but it just didn't feel very high stakes, and that sucks. I mean, I liked some of the reveals in the story. I love this world. I love that it's set in Houston. I love all of the side characters, so I wasn't like mad reading this book. There were definitely things that I enjoyed, but the romance, again, kind of was not my favorite, and I just feel like as the conclusion to a series, it was just kind of a letdown. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Maybe my feelings will change if I, read more books from this author duo going forward. Like, maybe I'll just develop such a love for them that I'm willing to overlook some of the shortcomings of this novel, but sadly at this point, that's not really where I'm at, so 3 stars. So those are the 17 books that I had on my most anticipated list for 2022. Yes, obviously only one of these was a 5-star read, kind of a disappointment in some ways, but honestly, I'm really not that sad about it. There were some new author discoveries on this list, and in general, I just like being kind of like up to date on what's new and fresh in romance. I'm not great at it, admittedly, but I like putting these lists together because it definitely like spurs my interest in finding out more about new books that are coming out. So I'm not sad that I gave these authors a try, even if not all of these were a total win for me. And hopefully in making this follow-up video, you have found some books that you could maybe add to your TBR or skip altogether if these are on your TBR and you're like unsure of them. One thing you could do for me before you click off of this video though is to go into the description of this video, fill out the Google form letting me know what your favorite books of 2022 were. I am working on a video where I read my subscribers' favorite books, whether it's a romance or otherwise, whether it was published this year or otherwise. I would love to know your favorite book and why. Let me know in that Google form that I'm going to leave. It's going to be completely anonymous, but I'm just trying to gather a list of the best books that y'all read this year because I am looking for some 5-star gems. Obviously, there weren't very many on this list, and that's fine, but I'm looking for some good stuff to read at the beginning of next year. So thanks so much for watching this video. Thanks for all your help. I love y'all so much, and until next time.